At this time, it's my privilege to ask Cheryl to come forward, Cheryl Hurd, Clark's wife, to give his introduction. Ready?
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome and thanks for joining us. As Lynn said, I've been given the honor of introducing Clark. And for those who don't know me, I am his wife and I'm also an occupational therapist. So write an introduction, they say. And I think, I've never had to do this. I don't really know what goes into an introduction. So of course, what I did was put on my thinking cap and think like an OT, because for all the students in the room, believe it or not, you're being brainwashed. There's a certain way that we think as OTs and you're in that process. So I immediately thought, okay, I'm going to look at his occupational performance, his, career as an OT, and do a little bit of task analysis and look at like, what's the secret sauce? What are those component skills that he has put together to be landing here today, getting the Barbara Sexton Lectureship? So first, a little background to set the stage. Many ask if we met in OT school at McMaster back in 1997, but we did not. We met 3 years before that when I was doing my undergrad at Queen's, and he was here doing his Master's of History. After an undergrad focused in Russian history, he started his Master's, and his thesis took a turn from the Russian background, and are you ready for it? The social implications of certain aspects of organized sport in Ontario universities between 1929 and 1970. Specifically looking at the conception that Western's football program played a key role in the social life, development, and growing success of the university as a whole. So as a small town girl, growing up on a farm, I remember thinking, wow, my brain doesn't work like that. I don't have abstract ideas like that. I don't love the challenge of analyzing them, writing a dissertation on it. But that is how Clark's brain works. See an idea, look at it from all sides, write about it, vulnerably put it out into the world, and hope that people can learn from it and enjoy the content. So fast forward a couple years, and Clark and I do end up in the same OT class at McMaster in 1997, where no prerequisites were required. There was no sciences, no anatomy, so someone with a history degree could apply, which wasn't the case at every university at the time. Fast forward another couple years, we finish our degrees, our second undergraduate degrees. We are the BHSC OTs, we're not master's OT students, so when I look at all those job ads now, I'm like, I don't even qualify. So after graduation, we both started our careers working at the Hamilton Psychiatric Hospital for the first year of our practice, before we transferred back home, and he started working at the London Psychiatric Hospital. So this was right around the time that the government was divesting the psychiatric hospitals. There were several of them across the province, and they were divesting them, which here in London fell under St. Joseph's Healthcare. So that is now where Clark has worked for the last 20 plus years, is at St. Joe's, working in the forensic mental health program. So to this day, he carries a full-time clinical caseload on the forensic rehab unit. So he supports clients as they prepare for discharge and their transition back out into the community. Many have asked over the years if he was going to apply for the various coordinator, manager, director roles that have come up, but he prefers spending his time face-to-face with his clients. Oh, and taking students on placement from everywhere in Canada and Australia and Scotland. You will hear more about the mentoring of students if he gets to pull the mic away from me. So at this point, he's taken, I'm not sure what the number is, more than 140 students, which to those who don't know anything about the students get it, but for those who might not, the average therapist might take a student a year, maybe two a year. Heather's taking there's people who are following his model, which is now to take 2 students every cycle, and now he's up to 4 students every cycle. So 140 is a lot of student mentorship. So at the same time that he's carrying his full caseload and having students following him around 40 hours a week, because it's a full-time, like students are with us full-time when they're on placement. He also fits in some guest lectures and course teachings, usually in mental health here at the university. He's an editor for the Open Journal of OT. In his downtime, he started a research lab at the hospital where he conducts studies and publishes on various topics in mental health, spirituality, leadership, nature spaces, and for example, the role of virtual reality. This is St. Joe's latest magazine, which features many pieces of research, including ones coming out of his lab on virtual reality, and the role that it plays for clients, some of whom, like his, are not able to leave the hospital. Finally, although I'm sure I've forgotten some accomplishments, after 10 years of wrestling with and refining his ideas, last year he published an OT theory, so the soil model. And I'm just now realizing that I also forgot he has an open source assessment that he wrote, the assessment of shopping, planning and shopping, which is open source, available to anyone who wants it. So he also saw a hole and thought, I'll just write an assessment. So all that background about Clark through the years to lead back to that question of breaking down his career, doing the task analysis, figuring out what that magic sauce is of how you get here, to be awarded the Barbara Sexton Lectureship and be honored for your contribution to the profession and your innovation and excellence in OT teaching. So here's my list of the 6 ingredients in the magic sauce. First, brilliance. Clark has a brain that just works different than others. I didn't expect to get emotional. He's asked me in the past, why don't other OTs act on their research ideas? And I'm like, because some of us don't have any. I don't just go to sleep and dream about research ideas. I have none. I have pain points in my practice. I have things that I wonder if it could be done better, but I don't think, let me turn that into a research study and get it through the ethics proposal. So I remind him sometimes that that's not the rest of us choosing not to do it. We just don't have the same ideas that he has. The second magic ingredient is time. It takes a lot of time, a lot of extra hours. So Clark tends to require less sleep than I do, which is good for him. He completed the bulk of his doctorate degree between about 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. at a time when our kids were much younger. They might have been 6 or 7. So I still needed help in the parenting world. So 10 to 2 a.m. is when he got his doctorate. And it's still currently when there's a lot of lit review, ethics proposal writing, student evaluation writing, all happening in those late hours of the evening. And by the way, when he got the doctorate, the research, again, always a research proposal, right? So the research and thesis was on informal leadership in OT. So who are the people who lead and guide even if their title doesn't put them in that position? So third ingredient in the secret sauce, drive, tenacity. It takes persistence. It takes grit to stay with these ideas, to carry them from their infancy, to navigate the ethics process and the questions that come in that you have to respond to before you can get it approved, to nurture them and carry them from conception to fruition or publication. And it's not always a smooth road, but it's one he's never wavered from despite the hurdles. For him, it's also a matter of thoughtfulness or compassion. And I, of course, see these traits in our personal life and how he engages with me and with the kids. But these traits also drive his research because it always circles back to client care, being thoughtful about the best approach to support clients, to help them progress toward independence, or to support his students in their learning. The fifth ingredient is having an employer and, more importantly, managers who are sitting at that table over there to support the research and the education time, who know that it's going to skew the stats. Because in hospital, it's all about stats. What are you using your time for? It's got to be a certain percentage of patient care. So while they are very supportive, and he is offered time each week to dedicate to his non-clinical roles, he doesn't always use it. That Friday afternoon block that he's supposed to be doing research, he often finds himself caught up in clinical care, So we've talked about the late nights, which is where the time ends up going. So this really is a hobby for him. And it's a good hobby because what else would he do? Watch more sports, play more video games. There's lots of time for that too. The last ingredient in the magic sauce is his colleagues that he can partner with, who can challenge and refine his ideas. And special thanks go to Jared Scott right here at the front and Stevens right at the other table. Stephen Yo, not that there aren't others, and some of them are here in the room, but you guys have been playing that role the longest. So that's my take. That's my interwoven story of both introducing Clark and sharing my view on what makes him pretty unique and special. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Clark Hurd.
Wow, that's a lot. Eh? You know, I wasn't quite expecting that. I wasn't expecting quite as much analysis of me. You know, it's an interesting outcome to have your spouse consider your occupational performance, isn't it? Well, all right, let's get into it. All right, so we're going to talk today about the spirituality of clinical education, and I think for me as a career professional, it's been the most important element of my career outside of the clinical outcomes that I've been able to support. And I am very, very fortunate today to have so many people here that I've taught, that I've worked with. A bunch of my former students are here. The greatest of them all, TL. And it's true, Jared. So, and I'm lucky that that as Cheryl said, I am challenged by those individuals every day. I also think that very few of us are ever going to achieve in our life the idea that we'll be recognized and that our parents will be there to see it. That's a big deal. It's a big deal, and I appreciate the nomination. And I think it's very rare to have that sort of occurrence. It's a privilege to be recognized for the kind of outcomes that we have in our careers. Hopefully, those of you who are here as students will at some point have that privilege. And so I support this work based on my time in the Occupational Therapy and Spiritual Care Research Lab, which Jared and Stephen and I support, and we have a number of other of my colleagues now involved in it. And it's weird, we get a lot of attention now. We're a small lab, but we hit well above our size. And I think hopefully there's a time that others look at what we do and say, well, I could do that too, if they want to, unlike Cheryl, who doesn't want to. So, and that's okay. And so this is a little bio, and you heard a little bit about me, so you all know about these things, but I am a graduate of McMaster University in OT, and I'm a graduate of Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in my doctoral work. I have taught 145 students, if we must be accurate. If you'd like to connect, that's my LinkedIn up there. You can send me a message and we can set something up and talk. That's my daughter, Bronwyn, in the picture there, by the way. We're at Michigan, best football school in America. So some preliminary thanks. And obviously I would like to thank the individuals listed there, primarily to start with the committee and those who were involved in my nomination. And each one of those individuals, had a different role and has had a different role in my getting to this point. And so I appreciate their input and their support in this process. And again, it's difficult to capture when you think about the sum of your career that that this sort of thing is going to occur for you. So you stand up here and it takes a second to get used to. So I would like to acknowledge Dr. Barbara Sexton and her husband for their support, and in particular their support of this lectureship. And their kindness in extending that. And I think I didn't know Barbara Sexton. I know a lot of people that knew Barbara Sexton. Interestingly enough, my work colleague, one of them, who's a 30-year therapist, was among the last classes that was taught by Barbara Sexton. And so she told me some stories about her in reflection, and I found it quite eye-opening and moving. Dr. Sexton had the same interest in mental health that I hold. Dr. Sexton was, by all reports, an excellent clinician. Dr. Sexton prioritized clinical work and was a strong advocate for it. And apparently Dr. Sexton, by all accounts, hell of a teacher. And so, you know, I'm happy to be mentioned, frankly, in the same company as Dr. Sexton and with the other people who were recognized with this award and this lectureship. And more so, I'm particularly happy to be the first day-to-day clinician to be recognized with this. To me, there's nothing better, there's nothing more important in our business, and the reason why we're all here is because my colleagues who are here, the OTs who are here, go to work every day and do the job. And why I talk about mental health when I teach and why I talk about leadership or when I talk about innovation, those things are only available to us because these folks here are doing a hell of a job. And so because of that, I'm privileged to be a clinician and to be recognized with this. And also to acknowledge, you know, my colleagues who are faculty members here who are committed to your learning. And so I'm particularly pleased to be able to recognize Dr. Sexton and, yeah, to be mentioned in companies such as her after hearing the stories from my colleague is particularly powerful for me. So I'd like to start thinking a little bit about spirituality, and spirituality has been a long-term agenda item for OTs. We've been talking about it since, well, according to the earliest things I read, and I'd like to think I've read every article on spirituality and occupational therapy, or every thesis as well, but 1979. And Urbanowski references, you know, task forces, and, you know, but we can go all the way back to a 50-year journey, more than now, in spirituality. And so when we look at it, you know, we have a really long-term theoretical relationship with it, and it really hit the mainstream in the 1991 Guidelines for Client-Centered Practice. And I'm going through this because, for two reasons, and I think we'll talk about it later, but there's a tension with spirituality in our business right now. You know, and I attend the conferences, and I go to the meetings, and I listen to people, and I read the stuff in the journals, and there's a real tension right now with where we are with spirituality. And the other piece is that we put spirituality in the center of our model, and everyone, you know, the reason why I wrote a model myself was because the students said, well, what the hell do we do with it? And so I think, you know, it entered the mainstream in 91, and for the sum of my career has been probably the biggest part or biggest informer in my day-to-day work. And so we also applied it in key theories. So 96, the person, environment, occupation model, which to this day I think is the most elegant of models. Again, when we look at Mary Law's work there, and she says the person is seen holistically as a composite of mind, body, and spirit. Well, this is key. It's also been applied in the modern era in the United States through the framework. And so we see that mentioned there, a little different than Canada, not as central, but instead via an applied criteria within their what they call client factors. Okay, but again, the centrality of it is such that it is still maintained in the framework, even today. And then, of course, there's a rather compelling modern model of practice, which I may recommend. I'd like to think rather well written with excellent graphics. I actually paid a guy to do the graphics, you know, to be truthful. My graphics look like a kid with MS Paint. But if you're interested, you know, I'm just saying I might have put a QR code up there. So we disagree a lot about spirituality. I think I call this the demand of definition in my work. And so for some reason, spirituality is the one spot in occupational therapy where we've pushed for consensus. And everybody says, well, if we don't agree on spirituality, then how will we be able to study it? How will we be able to apply it in practice? And this has been an ongoing thing, and I'm going to go through this a little bit because it speaks to the tensions, I think, about spirituality in our business. And so when we look at the definitions, we can see we've chased consensus and for years. And some of these definitions, by the way, when I put these together, now I'm only going to share a small number of them, but there are a lot of these definitions out there. Jerry, you know these definitions. And some of them you look at and you think, well, we get kind of out there, So like experience and meaning in daily life, I'm like, okay, I can get it. But, sense of purpose in the universe, that's pretty, it's hard for me to get my head around. And then, there's more of these. And like when we look at like harmony with the self and nature, okay. By the way, these images are from work that we've done in our research lab with participation in nature spaces with individuals with serious and persistent mental illness. Yeah, they lost me with the 97 definition. That's from Enabling Occupation version 2, which was the version that I had to learn along with guidelines for my exam. And I'll be honest with you, I was a chirpy young occupational therapist, not like now. And at the time, I thought I didn't even get it. Life force manifestation of, it was a lot. And so we have all this critical disagreement, and we scroll down to the bottom and it says, most struggle to define spirituality. And so this is the problem. This has been the problem, because in the delivery of that, people then just threw up their hands and they say, well, I'm not going to go down the path where I look at spirituality anymore because no one agrees on it with what it is, and so why should I bother? This is a problem. And it concerned me. It concerned me enough, and I'd taken enough students by that point that in 2011, 12, kind of sort of towards the end of my doctoral work, I started thinking like, what I have to write something that explains occupational performance via a lens of spirituality, which is an easy ask of yourself, but a rather hard delivery. And I literally did. I spent 10 years, and I actually came to my model, like I came to the soil thing, because pro tip for you guys in the back, okay? If you're gonna write an OT theory, you have to have a good acronym, okay? If you don't have a good acronym, your theory is not very good. You can't sell it to the people. It's true, Nick. So I was running one day and I got to about 16 Ks and I was exhausted. And the whole time I'm like, I need a title, I need an acronym. And I was like, Sol, and I'm like, no, it's like beer. And then I was like, soil, and I finally got there, right? But the reality of it was that I knew I had to have something, at least a deliverable, to explain this stuff. And I saw the pressures. I heard the pressures. And I also heard from my students who said, Clark, why are we bothering with this? It's the middle of our model. We don't know what to do with it. And so I thought, well, maybe I can help. So the problem here is that the implications for definitional clarity, though, is a significant limiter for us as a profession. And so I would argue that it is not client-centered, that it's frustrated the profession and has led to what I was talking about, which is essentially a certain element of our profession that says, why am I even doing this part? And then the desire to unite has instead divided and limited us, which is ironic, really. And that's the current state of professional debate. I was at AOTA last year, and I went to a couple sessions on spirituality, and that is the standard of our debate right now on it. So what to do? How am I going to approach this in today's presentation? Well, of course, I'm going to use my own definition. Why? Because I can. And also because I think that my definition is pretty good. So I look at spirituality for the purpose of this discussion as the sum of experience that each individual holds personally sacred. That may or may not be a religious expression, that may or may not be a physical expression, that may or may not be an emotional expression, that may or may not be participation oriented. I can tell you my brother-in-law Dave finds that on the golf course, okay? You might find it somewhere different. I can tell you that others here, each one of you are going to have a different experience of spirituality. It's going to be personal to you, and then it's going to be relevant to me if I'm ever your occupational therapist. And so in that context, The sacred speaks to what Evans discusses in the spiritual care literature as things set apart with special meaning. And so the key here is that we then shift that approach from the center of our model with a clinician or profession-defined desire for spirituality to saying, what does it matter to you? And that's a different dance. That's a different discussion. And so for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to use the definition, sum of experience that each individual is personally sacred. And then thinking about the spirituality of clinical education, and then how is this experienced by students? How is this experienced by myself? I couldn't figure out what, I thought for quite a while, because, I'll be honest with you, I can't imagine that, like an academic discussion of spirituality, well, enjoyable to me, by the way, maybe less exciting to the students in the back. I thought, how can I make this real? How do I make it appreciable? How do I make it appreciable to the folks I respect here, like Mary Beth, right? How do I make that work? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look at my thank you cards. That's what I'm going to do. I know, eh? Like, who would have thought of that? And so I actually, Miranda, I kept yours. Okay? So these are freely given to preceptors, and they're generally placed on your desks or taped to walls so your fellow team members can enjoy them. How many OTs in here have a thank you card somewhere in their office right now? Put your hands up. Right? That's a lot, right? We know what this is about. And so I taught 145 students. I had, I think, 83 cards in my office. 83 or 4, something like that. And so what I did, so I'd like you to know, though, before I tell you this, that this lecture concept was, there's a legal notice here, this lecture concept was reviewed with Lawson approval and staff at Lawson Research Institute, SJHC London. Please note that the analysis that noted that all gifted cards would not hold an expectation of privacy in thematic analysis for the purpose that they were non-compelled and provided as an expression of gratitude could be freely and publicly displayed. Okay. So, you do some research and you deal with the ethics committee, right? Like, it's like your shadow. And if you've dealt with the College of Occupational Therapists under any circumstance, you're going to be careful. And so I was going to be careful. That particular card there, by the way, is among my favorite of cards, and the level of creativity that OT students deliver on card tech is next level. And I'm going to tell you, if you're a student in the back, right, and you want to be remembered by your preceptor for that reference phone call, right, a little creativity doesn't hurt you, okay? It really doesn't. And honestly, like sometimes though, like that particular one, like I was particularly with the Kodo filter, I thought was the best part, where she attached the easily accessible Kodo filter. Any OT, immediately is going to resonate with those guys. The say the same thing in 2 to 3 sentences, also deeply, deeply moving to me. So the method, what did I consider? What is the sum of experience held personally sacred by students participating in clinical education? Okay. And how did I design it? I ran a qualitative design consistent with interpretative phenomenological analysis, looking at a set of information that I was able to glean from my thank you cards. Note each one of these thank you cards is an actual thank you card that I received. So why IPA? Because it's concerned with the detailed examination of personal lived experience and meaning. And so this is a very reasonable research method. I like it a little bit better than broad thematic analysis. The ability to engage in trustworthiness, I think, is superior. But hey, your mileage may vary and you be you. So there was an inclusion criteria, and it included the cards that I had saved on my desk. All content was completely de-identified, including removal of any dates, secondary identifiers, references to university programs, and in total, there was an N of 83. I still can't believe I analyzed greeting cards, but here we are. So what did I get out of it? The collected and transcribed data was coded for themes by myself, Jared Scott, occupational therapist, the Reverend Stephen Yo, and we looked at how it was that we could, again, code each one using an editing style of analysis. And following each one, we had overarching themes, and then following that, we tested for consistency, which was 85%, which in the world of things is very reasonable. And each coding team member did independently analyze the data. So what did I end up with? Oh, I should tell you, there is a little trustworthiness. So again, you should believe what we're saying, but I should tell you about it. So triangulation by theory and triangulation by by analyst was employed, and it reduced systemic bias. And I also ran these themes past some former students. And also, this supports a further instance of triangulation. So please know, some efforts were made to make this trustworthy. So first off, are there any questions before I proceed into the meat of this thing? Reasonable. That's, again, among the best cards I ever got. I cannot teach good taste. A student and I were discussing one day what her life goals were after she was going to get done OT. And she said, I want to get a car. And I said, what kind of car do you want to get? She said, I want to get a Toyota Corolla, Clark. And I was heartbroken. I said, did anyone ever get into a Toyota Corolla and said, my spirit is lifted after working 8 to 4 doing occupational therapy? I was unsure about this. It hurt me. And I told her so. And she said, well, what should I get? And I said, you should buy a Jeep. And she said, why, Clark? Why should I buy a Jeep? And I said, because the moment you exit your workplace and you see it, and it's warm, and it's 24 degrees, and you pop the top back, and you feel so happy. And she said, I'm going to get a Corolla. And I said, it was a metaphor. And so then we had a long talk. So anyway, at the end of her placement, she delivered to me among the nicest of cards. So the coding process identified several unique themes, and I'll describe these. So also, your students will make you unique gifts, by the way, if you take enough of them. The overarching themes were about what does it mean to be an occupational therapist? And that looked at a number of sub-themes that we discussed as a group. Providing a model or modeling an example and people learning from that example. And lastly, a transformative experience, which kind of leans in a little bit to transformational learning theory, because I think that was Steve that pushed that one a bit, which is a key learning theory within the spiritual care industry. So that's a great picture. So what does it mean to be an OT? And so I've chosen just a few of the quotes. There's many. 78 cards, people write a lot, or 83 cards, people write a lot. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I just thought I would include some of the meaningful data. The idea of our core values and what it means to be an occupational therapist, that being there on placement and how that drove, those individuals and enabled them to reflect on our profession and who they maybe wanted to be in it. And I think, that's the key for me, or at least one of them in clinical education. And there's a lot of therapists up at the front here who've provided a lot of placements. And that's essentially the first thing they're teaching you is, who are we in this thing? And so there was a few more kind of really interesting comments that I thought, and it was nice when somebody tells you that they learn what it means to be an OT from you, tells you something about something, or how we view the profession, and the idea of supporting people to feel confident and capable. And these are the things that as preceptors that we can do, as teachers they can do here at Western, make you feel relevant and confident about yourself and your place in the profession. I still display this in my office. This is among the greatest gifts that I received as a preceptor. And so I pop these in because we're talking about the spirituality of clinical education. And the spirituality of clinical education is, of course, shared by your preceptors. And sometimes students are pretty creative. And so I had 2 students, by the way, both of whom are great occupational therapists at this point. Okay, these are, fairly medium-term occupational therapists now. And so they gave me the pinata of theory. One day, after asking them to make everything 2 to 3 sentences that they'd made longer, I said, tell me how you theoretically considered this content and walk me through your clinical reasoning. They looked puzzled. They were a bit troubled. And I said, just name the theories that you employed and we can move on. And they didn't seem happy about that. And I said, okay, just name one. And they looked at me and they just started listing theories. They said PEO. And then I was like, no. They said MOHO. And I was like, CAWA. I was like, what? Like, what the hell's going on? And then he just kept naming theories, one after the other, like a deluge of theories. And I said, do you know what this is like? And they said, no. I said, this is like a kid with a piñata, and you guys are whacking it to get the theory out of it. And so we spent a little time learning theory after that. But to this day, they gave me the piñata theory and a bottle of scotch at the end of placement, and I thought it was very appropriate. So the second theme, we look at providing a model or modeling for people. So there's a Christian biblical term that Steve hipped me to. He says, walk with the wise and you will grow wise. I think it's fairly universal. I think we can all kind of see where that's relevant. And I think there's a lot of therapists up front here with a lot of wisdom. And the commitment side that I know from my colleagues speaks, I think, very much to these kinds of points. And similarly, that last one though, eh? Glad to have learned from the second best OT from your house.
I need to give you a hug that says the same thing.
They may have. They may have. Students will also be kind of funny with their gifts, and this is from a relatively recent student. For those in the back, because we're teaching a little bit today, I'm the biggest proponent in the world of non-committal language in my notes. So, well, you might know that, eh? And so that doesn't mean that I'm not taking a position, but somebody's going to appear some way, they're going to demonstrate something, something's going to seem like something, and I'll contextualize that comment, and then I'll say, Miranda Roovers appeared reasonable in her participation in today's meal prep group, given the context of whatever we prepared. Okay. Student took that to heart. And so then you find yourself one day drinking coffee out of a mug that says that you yourself are reasonable. It's a transformative experience. This is, again, about the spirituality of clinical education. These are learning experiences that are transformative and change the life course or the life lessons for that person. This is the power that each one of you in the room have if you choose to take a student, if you choose to commit to that, if you choose to sit with them and hear their ideas and learn about them. This is the power that we have. I can tell you that, and I look over here at, Heather, who I know takes a lot of students and has had that juice. Same with Martha. There's a lot of OTs up here who've done that. But it's a transformative experience that we are supporting, and the idea that when my students talk about working with the patients who I was with and that they feel the power of changing someone else's life narrative and supporting that, and that something I did pushed them to see our business differently, and that they learned about themselves, or that they'll buy a Jeep. I don't know. It's a metaphor, everybody. Speaking of which, yeah, that's nice. Eh? Students said, we bought you a Jeep, Clark. I'm like, thank you, guys. So let's think about, where does this align with us, with theory, when we look at these themes? Modeling aligns pretty nicely with doing. Meaning aligns nicely with being. Changing and transformation aligns nicely with becoming. And of course, that was Dr. Wilcox's theory in 1999. I think among the best of occupational therapy theories. And it was compelling to me that themes that we just figured out cold based on data and cards linked specifically to one of the more powerful theoretical informers in our business. And so when you look at it, I think the idea that the sum of experience that students held personally sacred, that it aligned so much with modern frameworks, I was pretty happy about it. And so we can look at this now as a precepting informer. And so, how do we make this thing work for the preceptors in the room? How do we make this work for the students in the room? How do you communicate that to your preceptors in January and say, this is what I need, And I would suggest to you that the first thing is what in a previous article around spiritual care, Stephen and Jared and I linked to the concept of active presencing. And I think most therapists probably do a decent job of this. But the intentionality is what's necessary. And the intentionality is, I think, what separates good preceptors from the best, from the greatest, from the ones you remember, for sure. And I think that's the power, is that intentionality. Spiritual care professionals would refer to this as using some different languaging, but maybe something around incarnationality, but the idea of active presencing and being there and being intentional about that presencing and covering the content that the student needs to hear. And so then the being part, being as a preceptor informer. So the idea, Claver and Bart within the spiritual care literature talk about the idea of socially including concepts, okay? And so the concept of attentiveness is a socially including concept. And so when you as students are engaged by your preceptor, are with them, with your teams, are introduced to those concepts, are brought into the circle, are empowered in that way, you are socially included. That's the power we have. That's something we can give you, okay? And I think the key here is that you need to bring the student into our milieu, and that part doesn't have to necessarily be purpose-driven. Right? Why am I sitting with students going, what are your life goals? What kind of car do you want to drive when you get done? Right? But I want to learn about that individual and where are they going to fit in our thing, and how am I going to help that person to get where they want to get, the sum of experience that they hold personally sacred, right? Which may be quite different than what my goals are. Finally, that's pretty good, eh? For anyone who's in the room here, by the way, these were consented, these photos. So that's Adam Lee, who teaches the second year intensive, and my colleague Claire Ashton, who's an occupational therapist in Hanover, Ontario. Placement has to be transformative. It needs to be transformative. It should be transformative. And from a deliverable standpoint, enabling students to make a shift in meaning making, and what Kang describes in this way, I think this is the idea that you're becoming something. The placement should not be 8 weeks where you got to deal with Clark Hurd and get past them. Just get your 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever it needs to be. It can't be that. It can't be that if you're going to be great with the people that we work with. It can't be that if you're going to work with clients and meet them where they are. It can't be that if you're going to work with the relative humanity of the people that I work with, certainly not the ones that others here in the room work with. It has to be transformative in the way you view your humanity and the way you view the humanity of others. So what does all this mean? Conceptually, we're talking about placement as a time of critical change and a shared spiritual journey. So it is not simply a narrative where, and maybe it's not always that, and maybe that's where, maybe I'm an idealist, and maybe that's where we are aiming to get to. But you got 8 weeks with people, and there's an intensity in that work, and there's a passion and a drive in that work, and we're talking about the humanity of people who are vulnerable, who trust us to help them. And so if we focus on meaning, and if we focus on our responsibilities and we focus on modeling, then we're going to inspire transformative practice long term. The sum of this experience, held personally sacred, this is the spirituality of clinical education in my view. So how do we action all of this? I'm going to give you 6 easy steps. Learn about your students. Okay, and so students, learn about your preceptor. Get to know them a bit. They're probably kind of scary when you first meet them. Develop the same trust as you would with your patients or clients. It has to be that with the preceptor. And if it's not that, then you should ask why it's not. You should ask why it's not. And maybe that person's precepting for the wrong reasons. Maybe they shouldn't be precepting. And then listen to the stories. I spent a ridiculous amount of time telling stories to my students. Right? I think mainly because it's fun, and because we have so many OT stories and like so many things happen. You get a group of OTs. You guys know what you call a group of OTs when they get together? You guys know? You got like a flock of geese and you got a herd of sheep. You know what you call a group of OTs when you get 7 OTs together? It's a concern of occupational therapists. And they're going to share stories. It's our nature. Do that with your preceptor. Help them to know you. Share your journey. Share your ideas and your values. And by the way, no one has to agree on these things. It is absolutely not necessary. There is no need to agree. It's okay to be vulnerable, right? Spend the time talking about your view on the profession, and learn their view, okay? Let your students see your humanity and that you have vulnerability. The preceptors who were most powerfully informing my practice and the spirituality that I carry were the ones that weren't perfect. They were the ones that talked to me about the struggle. They were the ones that talked to me about the weight of our business. They were the ones that talked to me about, the difficulty of it. And I can tell you that among the group here, and I'm not talking out of school, but I can tell you that among this group here, right, we lost a patient yesterday, right? I worked with that patient for years, right? It's damn upsetting. It was very upsetting. I found it very hard. I find it hard today. I sat around and talked with guys on my units. I talked with the nurses, talked with other OTs, sat around. It's upsetting. The therapists are vulnerable. I can tell you, it's okay to know them as humans. Let them see your humanity too. And expect a lot from your preceptor. You should, okay? And I should expect a lot from my students because the business is going to expect more. Ultimately, the business is going to expect far more than an 8 or an E when I mark you at a level 3, okay? I think everyone in the room who's a healthcare professional has a very clear idea about that. Now, before I go on to the next slide, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to recognize 3 names, okay? I had 3 preceptors, Trish Marriott, Jacqueline Ball, and Craig Sutton, who were the best preceptors that I could have expected at my age and stage. Craig Sutton, unquestionably, the single greatest OT on the planet, in my opinion. And I've told many, many people this. The guy was a single OT running the entire St. Catharines General operation by himself. He took students, he said to me, strictly so he could feel like he had other OTs hanging around. Okay? This resonates with my own personal narrative because I came into forensic in 2000 and I worked 6 years on my own. And I worked on all the units by myself. And when Terry Lynn came, I took Terry Lynn because I wanted to have another OT around, right? By the way, there was 13 social workers at that time. If you think I wasn't crusty, okay, I certainly was. Craig Sutton showed me the way. He showed me the path. Hopefully your preceptors show you the path. So, because they're only going to give you the award once. And so you can do what you want when you get the award, right? That's what they told me. And so if you are a preceptor or you're a clinical educator, stand up. Stand up. If you've precepted a damn student, stand up. If you're a healthcare professional and you've precepted one student, stand up. Take your recognition. That was nice, eh? Stuff. They give you a mic, you get a lot of power. So, there's people in the room here that have they have a couple of microphones, and I would be happy if there are any questions. I will answer them happily. I think so. First off, the first question is always going to be: are you meeting the college standard? Right. So, are we meeting the standard? If we're meeting the standard, and I've got, I don't know, I probably got 15 of my former students in the room here right now, maybe a little more. And they would tell you that I don't expect you to be me, And I think that's a discussion point with your preceptor, is to say, okay, this is my voice. And I understand that preceptor to preceptor, and some folks are going to be more firm about that. I don't find that it benefits you as a learner with me to say, you have to write the notes the way I write the notes. I think it benefits you as a learner to meet the college standard using your voice, and the two of us sitting there at 3:30 in the afternoon and me reading your notes and saying, okay, let's, why are we doing it this way? Or can we say the same thing in 2 to 3 sentences? And then compelling what I would capture as a reflective practice from you. The idea of going to placement, there's going to be always a balance, right? Between, if you go on placement with Martha Scott, it's going to be Martha Scott's show and you're the guest star, right? That's kind of how it's got to run, because we have certain accountabilities to a regulatory college. But end of the day, I sit with students. Every student that I have comes from a different background. Every student that I have has a different undergrad. Every student that I have has a different worldview. Every student that I have has a different socio-cultural worldview. As long as we're meeting the college standard and the kind of information that has to get over, again, I work in forensic mental health too, so we have certain requirements that we probably want to talk about from a professional standpoint, or at least make sure we have it captured. And I think the depth of documentation in our thing might be a little greater than some places, and I say that respectfully. But otherwise, the journey's you. If you're taking students, the journey's got to be about you, isn't it? Isn't that why I'm doing it? Is that in 10 years you can call me up and you're like, hey, Clark, I took 2 students and it was fun, right? Which is the kind of calls I get. And I think for those reasons, yeah, if we're doing it, let's make it safe for you. Let's make it, interesting for you. Let's figure out what your style is going to be with the acknowledgement that you're working somewhere in 6 months. So maybe we should try to get it right. Does that make sense? Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, if I was to do a brief poll of the forensic employees here, I suspect everyone would tell you that there's a little stigmatism associated with our business. I actually have a student with me, and right now, and she said to me, of course, you wonder about, sort of the setting, and my previous students in the summer are telling you always the same thing, or prior, everybody's grandma is in some way concerned when they say they're going to forensic mental health, right? Because unfortunately, it's hard to get over the content of our business, which is about compassion and respect. But most people see forensic as some combination of either Hannibal Lecter or CSI, right? It's kind of how it's viewed at my family reunions. And, I think for us, the trick is to get over in a way that, identifies the compassionate nature of our work and the kindness that we associate in it, and the humanity of each one of the individuals with whom we work, and the tacit acknowledgement that, look, nobody gets up on a Tuesday morning, decides they're going to become floridly mentally ill and commit a crime. No, they don't do that any more than anyone here decides they're going to get up on a Tuesday morning and get cancer. And so, our job is to approach that care with the same respect and compassion that hopefully your teams at Park would approach their care with as well. I don't think any preceptor really has all the answers, and you learn about your patient, or you learn about your students the same way you learn about your patients. And you learn about what their unique needs are, and you learn about their humanity, and you learn about where they want to go in this business, and you learn about their vulnerabilities, and you learn about their potentials. And good preceptors, and by the way, good university professors, do the same thing. And they spend their time learning about the humanity of the individuals with whom they're supporting. And I think that, this is really the key. We spend an 8-week journey together. It's pretty compressed, and I think about the folks, my best friends in the business, a whole bunch of them I precepted. And, so how do you develop such an intensity in your relationship over an 8-week period that people know you for the human that you are? And so hopefully your preceptors know you for the human that you are and the humanity that each one of you in the back carry. And I think that's, what Nick's talking about is this idea of, when I spoke of it earlier, this idea of presencing. Hopefully the preceptor is doing that with a certain amount of intentionality, but hopefully there's also a certain amount of intentionality of that with the student. And I'll be honest with you, you got to let them in a bit, both on the preceptor side and the student side. It is a dynamic relationship. It's not simply a teaching delivery relationship. And as I've matured, I think, as a preceptor, I'd like to think, I'd like to think I'm better at those things, at the intentionality of those things, at the trying to learn about people and their humanity things, at the making it fun. Right? At the end of the day, this business is hard. This business is very hard, and you will experience very hard things in this business. And I don't sugarcoat that. I've seen terrible things, but I've also seen incredible joy, and I've also seen incredible outcomes. And I work with 7 of my former students every single day at our hospital. Right? There's no greater reward than coming into work and Cody from last year's class is on A2 right now. He's got a full-time job in our building. He was my student 5 months ago. Okay? Point is that there's no greater reward, there's no greater gift than seeing young folks like yourself have success. And I think it's going to depend where you are. So there's going to be a number of factors that are going to inform So first off, I would encourage you to, to learn a little bit about how as a business we look at spirituality in general. Like just, some background. I went through a little bit, like a tiny fraction of it, but, and I would encourage you that we're not doing interventional spiritual care work in the same way as, say, Nick would or Stephen would here, which is a very different dance. And I'd like to think at this stage I know a fair bit about it, but it's not something that I would ever do or even claim to have real powerful knowledge about. But the idea of sitting with somebody, and this I can guarantee you, Mike's sitting here right now, I guarantee you that he has heard someone say to him, why did God, higher power, or whatever, why did they allow this to happen to me? This is a question that's pretty universal. I'm sure MB has heard this. I'm sure Jared's heard this. Right? Martha working with guys with stroke, Robin, like the therapists here have all heard this. And it's common because as humans, our desire is to make sense of things that don't make sense, right? And illness experience does not make sense conventionally to us because there's a why me question going on, right? Why would this occur? And at an interventional level, when we get into that stuff, there's different ways you can deal with it. If it's really existential in nature, okay, so why would higher power allow for me to have my arm chopped by a radial arm saw, and now I have to get this terrible splint, and, I cut my tendons here, and now I'm like this, right? Now I got to do 2 years of physio, and, I'm off my job, and I can't do whatever, let alone the occupational performance. I tend to explore the meaning pieces more than, because I'm OT, right? So I would say to them, let's talk about what this means to you, okay? Now, if it's existential, I'm probably going to involve my colleague Stephen, okay? And I'm going to say, Steve, we've got a broader existential question going here, and, that's a little bit outside of our area code if you look at how spirituality seats in a CMOP-E. But spirituality informs every one of those other things around the circle in the CMOP-E, right? And your occupational performance more broadly. And so I'm going to say to them, well, talk to me about that. So, you have a person in forensic mental health care and they say, Clark, why am I here? How the hell did this happen? One day I'm like smoking weed, doing stuff. And then the next day I'm like floridly, psychotically ill. And, and I did this terrible crime. And they're like, this isn't who I am. And now we're getting into the essence of their being or who they are. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is talk to them about their occupational performance. I'm going to say, okay, well, tell me about who you really are then. Let's learn about, the you that's foreign to this experience right now. And that's going to be useful to our team. It's going to be useful to the psychiatrist. It's going to be useful to Steve. It's going to be useful to the nurses that work with them. Because I actually do an assessment called the self-report questionnaire where I ask exactly that. It's kind of like be the equivalent of like an initial on steroids. And we go through every area of occupational performance in every domain. And I say, okay, who are you in this? Let the team know. Instead of us doing the usual ad hoc that we do where we interview folks and we're like, all right, and then I make some, I got some interpretation and some thoughts and I run that through a theoretical lens and I, make some recommendations. And I say, no, tell me about you. And I find that approach, I think, tends to get to where I want to know that human and who they are at their essence and how to best engage with them. And you're not always going to hit that, for different reasons. You're going to run into things like trauma, or you're going to run into things like anger, or you're going to run into things like substance abuse, or you're going to run into things like resentment, or you're going to run into things like illness experience, personality disorder, stuff that's going to complicate the ability to get to that authentic place. But if you work hard enough, long enough, and you develop a trusting relationship, by the way, the same as I want you to develop with your preceptor in future, if you work hard enough, long enough on that, then, and I'm privileged, in the forensic OTs here, we get to work with people a lot longer than a lot of places. And so we get to know those folks in very different ways, and you get to know their humanity in different ways. We were doing a meal prep group this morning, and we made it was a nice recipe actually, like fried potatoes with some mushrooms. It's like an Eastern European kind of scenario, and it was so good, right? And by the way, I tried it, and the patients, were really happy about it. And the patient shared with me that was something that they would enjoy with their family in a different recipe. And you think, okay, that's just anecdotal, Clark, but that patient isn't one to share. Okay, and so. We don't get that to that place where we're going to engage their spirituality. I'm going to like goal 5 on the on the electronic record. Engage spirituality and occupational performance with patients. It doesn't quite work that way. It's more of like a sort of chipping away sort of scenario. But I think that there has to be what I talked about earlier in this presentation: the intentionality, the presencing that works for us in teaching, the presencing that works for me in precepting. Also works with you in your clinical life, if that makes sense. Thank you. Nice. Honestly, I think the greatest gifts I've gotten in this life are to be a parent to you and to be a spouse to your mom, and to be privileged enough to be able to work in this business and to know these people.
So on behalf of the school, thank you so much, Dr. Hurt. I'm sure that everyone was very engaged, and clearly the questions indicated the kinds of interest and message that you gave today. We have just a couple of things to share with you. Let's give her a round of applause.
That's right, I pulled this stuff.
Who's taking pictures? Have you got somebody taking pictures? You got this camera here?
Leah's got the camera.
Who's got it? Yeah, okay, good. Go ahead. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing that message, your thoughts, your feelings, your passion. This is a passionate individual who we are all so proud to have in our midst, to be present with you today. I can't thank you enough. This is an incredible thing that we have in our life, to meet people and have a time like this where we can all share together and have a sense of joy. So we are going to have a little bit more joy, and the way that we do this in our traditional OT style at Western. So we are going to celebrate together before everybody goes with some fantastic cookies, the 50th anniversary cookies in celebration, and in celebration of your lectureship with us today. And those who would like to come up with that lovely group photo of students on the stage that I saw at the Welcome Back to the Profession Day, you are welcome to come up here and get some pictures before everybody takes Clark over there and takes other pictures. So we're going to open up, if I can get some help to open up the cookies over there. Today I've opened up, and everybody can come get some cookies and enjoy the cookies, and then on stage for some pictures. That would be great. Thanks a lot.